Welcome to Good Thinking Live. Welcome everyone to the show. As you know, if you are an experienced and long-time good thinker, let us know who you are and where you're from. We're streaming live from LinkedIn Live and from YouTube. We usually do this every Monday, not every Monday, but most Mondays, 9 a.m. Pacific time here in the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And sometimes I can see who you are in the chat, but sometimes it just says like LinkedIn Learning user or LinkedIn user or YouTube user. So definitely let us know who you are and where you're from in the chat, because this is a show, this is a conversation versus a lesson. So we want your input and any ideas, and particularly for this one, because this is something new. And I don't know about you, I'll be curious to know if any of you, if this is new information for people, or if this is something that you kind of have been thinking about, because for me, this is something I've been kind of cogitating on, and I'm not really sure what the answers are, but I'm excited to reach out to you good thinkers to see if you have any answers. So that's the whole point of this, where we are going to be revealing what may be considered an incredible disruption and a new planning fallacy. So I'm going to say hi to a few early birds. Nikolai, welcome to the show. Abdurrachid, welcome to the show. Let us know where you're from, too, because it's fun to see people from all over the world. Barclay from DC, Stephen from the Rose City. So we are having a lot of good thinkers hopping on the show, and we hope that even if you're watching after the show, after the live show, put in your input, particularly for this one, because we really need to see what your thoughts are about this. We don't end with answers. We kind of end with questions, which is great, because for good thinking, where we take a little bit of time each week away from all the time we are told what to think, time spent thinking about what to think, to just give ourselves a little bit of time for thinking about how we think, to improve how we think. Oh, fantastic. Nikolai from Crew UK. Welcome everyone to the show. All right, so we'll start with a question, as we usually do. And before I do, I'll say hi to Tanvir from Pakistan. Welcome, Tanvir. We're going to start with a question. Do you have a project? This will be good to kind of think about, to put this in your mind. You can keep this project in your mind throughout the show. Do you have a project that you're working on or planning to work on? And it could be a personal project. It could be a project at work. If you do, if you want to share it in the chat, excellent. And while you think about this project and get it in your mind, I'm going to tell you about a project that I'm working on where I fell subject to the traditional planning fallacy. And then we're just going to spend a little bit of time on the traditional before we pivot to the new planning fallacy. So Johan from Johannesburg, welcome to the show. All right, ready? Do you have a project that you are working on, either with your company or your team or yourself? Mine, I'll share mine while you put yours in the chat. So my project, or the one that comes to mind, is my company, Applied Curiosity Lab. Our company is deep in this, creating this decision-making cohort. It's a coaching and training cohort. And we've been working on it and doing it, but we're really launching it in a much more sophisticated way. And it's been in the plans. And if you had asked me, when I thought this project would launch, I would have said for sure no later than Q2 2023. Now, why would I have said Q2 2023? Was it just a hunch? So here's the question. When do you think you'll be done with your project? When you think about a project, any project could be like, I'm going to plant a garden, or I'm going to, we're launching some big project at work, or whatever. When do you think that you'll be done with your project? Maybe you're studying for some accreditation or something. When do you think you'll be done with your project? A week? A month? Before you're a certain age? By the time I'm 40 years old? By the time I'm 50 years old? What are you using to judge when you will be done with this project? That's the question to start with. What do you use to judge? What kind of information? All right, so Ray says, oh, excellent. Ray says, my small project is dismantling my little vegetable herb garden and converting it back to lawn. Okay, fantastic. I love that. What are you you might have a seasonal thing, like you can't plant grass or can't plant a lawn in certain, what are you using to judge when you will be done with this project? Maybe you just say, well, I'll get to it when I get to it. But in your mind, what are you using to judge? So have you ever heard or thought, why did I think I would be done with this project by now? Or why did we as a company think we'd be done with this project by now? Yep. That's what I said to myself about our HSDM, our high stakes decision making launch out of beta. And that's evidence of the traditional planning fallacy. And we're not alone, because this planning fallacy costs organizations billions of dollars. London's latest train line was originally set to open in December of 2018. But just a few days before it was set to open, I think it was like 2 or 3 days before its inauguration, it was halted due to failure to meet project deadlines. When it finally opened, May 2022, the line was estimated to be at least £4 billion over budget. So this traditional planning fallacy explains how and why we tend to underestimate how long projects will take. Servan, welcome from Istanbul. Thanks for being here. All right, we want your participation. So does anyone know kind of the main reasons? And this planning fallacy was described in the 1970s by behavioral economists, psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. So this is not a new concept, but what we're going to get to in a minute, I think, is something that may come as a surprise to you. It's fascinating. So we'll get to that in a minute. But I'm going to just tell you the two reasons for the traditional planning fallacy, so you can contrast this with this new idea, this new planning fallacy. The two reasons are that, let's see what Nikolai says. Okay, let's see. I love it. We have to consider what kind of project we're planning for. Is it conceptual or something to be implemented after a certain time? Okay, that is really, I'm going to put a little rubber chicken reward, because that is going to really cue us up for some of the next stage of the new planning fallacy. I'm so glad you said that. Let's see. Johan, we make the assumption that all resources, including people, will be prioritized and are fully available for this project. Perfect. The reality is nearly everybody and everything are shared resources. Fantastic. And that's really getting into the nitty gritty of that. So I love that. And Nikolai says, even for planning is required time so we can compose the plans. Okay. Planning about planning, kind of the meta work. Love it. Okay, these are all excellent. The way that Kahneman and Tversky described that, I'll get into it quickly before we jump into the new planning fallacy, is we are really overly optimistic. And people go, well, how could you say we're overly optimistic when everything's so negative? This is very specific when it comes to forecasting how long things will take. We fail to consider external factors like getting sick, or someone essential having a family member having to, some tragic accident, or a pandemic, or some kind of conflict, or environmental something, things that happen all the time. But we kind of think we don't include them in our plans because they're so existential that it's hard to even think about. Plus, so here's a question. Now we're going to have a before and after. So when you are looking at making a decision about a project, whether it's your raised gardening project or my HSDM or whatever project you're thinking about, but before you've made that decision, when you're creating the plan, what is easier to imagine? Success or failure? Success or failure? When you are creating the plan, what is more easy to imagine? Success or failure? So this is the before you're creating the plan. All right, so we've got some good comments. Abduracha says, also you consider the progress in terms of applied resources and productivity to meet that deadline. Excellent. Barclay says, Nikolai, agreed. More conceptual projects are sometimes harder to plan. Yes, and that's a big hint at the new planning fallacies we're going to get to. Aha, totally agree. This is excellent, though, about external factors. Yes, we feel it's hard but when you're making a plan, Abduracha says, it's easier to imagine success. Okay. Now, after, I'm going to take this little banner thing off so we have more room for your comments. After your plan, is it easier to imagine failure before you make the plan or after you make the plan? Well, think about that, because there's before the plan where you might think of risks and successes and failures. But after you make the plan, it's very difficult to imagine failure. And most people, after they decide, only want to imagine success. we're told to do this. I mean, investors don't want to invest in entrepreneurs who aren't totally convinced that their project will be successful. But here's the thing. There's often only one correct outcome. And yet there are countless ways for our plan to go awry. So there is a little bit of a imbalance between before we make a plan and after we make a plan. And the second, so the optimism bias is really a difficult one, because who wants to think about failure? That just gets in the way. And the second reason for the traditional planning fallacy is we fail to consider data from similar cases because we think our situation is unique. Now, I could say so unique, but there's no such thing as so unique. You're either unique, meaning one of a kind, or you're not. There's not a continuum of unique. So it turns out that our projects are not unique. There are aspects that are unique, but we fail to learn from similar projects because we look inside, called our inside view, and fail to look outside at our outside view. So if you think here, we have an incredible team trying to do something that has never been done before, you may want to be on the lookout for the planning fallacy, the traditional planning fallacy, by looking for examples of something even remotely similar to what has been done before. So Nikolai says, failure comes when you start to consider every aspect of the project where it's possible to fail or go wrong. Yes, I like that. I think this will be interesting. I'd be curious to hear what you think about this new planning fallacy and how this plays a part. And when we start to creating that's why we start to create emergency plans. Exactly. And Abdurrahman says there's some sort of confirmation bias where you embrace evidence supporting success and neglect the one that does. Absolutely. These two comments deserve rubber chickens. We have to give out the rubber chickens. People, why the rubber chickens? Why not the rubber chickens? Rubber chickens. Okay. Now we're going to get into the new planning fallacy. So let's go. Because we've covered this traditional planning fallacy before. So let's get into the new planning fallacy and why what is happening right now, particularly in tech, has been described by some very capable software engineers, software developers, as perhaps one of the greatest market efficiencies or even deceptions in history. All right. So I'm going to start with this question. Would you ever consider taking a second job on the sly? Like not telling your existing employer. Now, I'm not talking about as a contractor. I'm a contractor. I have many, many clients. That's different. I'm not an employee of another company. I'm talking about if you are an employee of another company, you might not want to answer this, but would you consider it? Would you consider it if you're brave enough to put it in the chat? We won't tell anybody. All right. So Johan says, my client wants fake news. If I'm realistic, they'll take the work elsewhere. Okay. This is super, super, super important. Keep Johan's comment in mind as we look at this new planning fallacy. Now, here's the question, right? Since the traditional planning fallacy has to do with underestimating how long a project will take, what do you think this new planning fallacy is about? Think. The old planning fallacy, we underestimate. We think the London Railroad's going to open in 2018. It opens in 2022. We see it all the time. What is this new planning fallacy about? Anyone want to take a guess? Well, if you guessed overestimating, you are right. Overestimating how long a project will take is this new planning fallacy. And it really hasn't been widely described in the research or articles yet. So you're going to be on the lookout for something that I think may be new. I don't know. You'll have to tell me. Like, Becky, this is old news to me, but maybe not. So what happens when projects are projected to take longer or cost more than they need to take or cost? What happens? Now, we already know what happens when projects take more time than what was planned. It's obvious. The date comes and goes, like the London Rail project, and the project isn't done, or the dates get pushed out. Some of the people on board don't even remember that the original date was way back in 2018 when we first talked about this in 2014. So we don't even necessarily know. We don't even, it just gets pushed out and pushed out and pushed out, or the budget gets revised. Comment. How do you know if you projected too much time or allocated too many resources to a project, whether it's your own project or mostly this planning fallacy tends to work in ways that in groups. So how do you know if you have project bloat? Does anyone have any way that they would know if they have project bloat, particularly any project managers out there? Any project managers, that would be wonderful. Like send this to any project manager, because I would, how do you know if you have project bloat? All right. When companies overinvest and they realize it, excuse me, like Facebook and their year-old metaverse initiative, they may have layoffs and shift from the metaverse to AI. This is social contagion. Everyone, oh, we've got to have metaverse, so we hire all these people. Amazon's hiring, so we have to hire. So they're going to hire in that. No, Amazon laid off, so we have to lay off, and Facebook lays off, and Google lays off. Social contagion. Okay. So when they usually will pivot, but what happens when a successful project was projected to take longer and require more resources than necessary? How do companies know? How do you know when you've projected to take longer than necessary or use more resources than necessary to complete a project? The overestimating side of the planning fallacy is harder to see. Unless the project is deemed a failure or it triggers this need to pivot, how is the extra money or time set aside? Doesn't that money just disappear? Doesn't that time just disappear? What happens when you overestimate a project? How do you see it? Okay, so Abdurrahman says, probably your income statement. Maybe. So what do? You say you have this excess, and you go back and say, wow, we really thought this was going to take 6 months, but it took 3 months. Or we really thought this was going to take $2 million, but it took $100 million. It took $1 million. All right. Johan says, I would try to remove bloat and rather show risk allowance as float available to the project manager. Excellent. Float. Keep that in mind. Well, I think I see two issues at play, and I'm open to anyone else kind of weighing in on this. Nikolai says, with engaging with stakeholders. Oh, excuse me, right here. Yeah, excellent. There's ways to know, but what does it mean? Like, if you're a stakeholder and you estimated that it was going to cost this much and you went and got investments for this much, I mean, do you just like say, oh, here's the excess, we're going to give it back to you? No, it gets absorbed into the project, the time. Oh, we'll use more time for marketing. But here are the two reasons. Here are the two issues at play, rather. Productivity can be sacrificed for predictability. All right, what does that mean? Well, this can happen in many ways. I'm going to be a little critical of agile. I know it's blasphemous, but this may be one of the flaws of agile. We'll see. See what you think. Like agile sprints. Have you ever seen these situations? So employees wanted to deliver on promises that they make for a task or a sprint, so they end up hedging their commitment. Maybe Nikolai says, who said float? Aha, no, Johan said float. So they end up hedging their commitment by saying that their part will take longer. Essentially some task bloating to make sure that they complete the time within the sprint. Have any of you seen this? Not saying that you have to admit that you've done this, but have any of you seen this? You say, okay, how long will this project take? You say, I might be able to do it in 3 days, but I'm going to give myself 2 weeks because that's how long the sprint is. The sprint is 2 weeks. So why would I say, unless I have to, why would I say that it's only going to take me 2 days? Give myself some time. I'm going to hedge. So how many of you have seen this hedging? How about this one? A new employee joins the team in the middle of a sprint. They aren't assigned any work until the beginning of the following sprint. Again, productivity sacrificed in the name of predictability. So maybe that's one of the reasons, one of the issues at play. Abdurrahman says you can do so by evaluating the progress in terms of budget and engaged resources and the period of your business model. Excellent, excellent. And then we have, even without sandbagging, a sprint estimate essentially anchoring anyway. Hooray, rubber chickens. A sprint is anchoring. If you say a project is going to take 2 weeks, you're going to anchor, that 2 weeks is anchorable. If you say, or a task, any period of time is an anchor. Any amount of money is an anchor. Anchoring, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. It's funny that I really It's funny that real. I have to give you credit because it's totally an anchor, and I hadn't really thought about it in terms of an anchor. The first rule of project management: all available resources will be consumed. Ha ha ha! Excellent, excellent. All right, there's another reason. I said there are two issues. I think you guys are clear. Like you've experienced these other issues, but there's one other issue, and this is kind of an uncomfortable reason, and it has to do with the fact that there are wizards among us, and they're hiding. What? Wizards are knowledge workers who can and do they can think things rather and do things that almost everyone else cannot do and maybe couldn't do no matter how hard we try. They can perform tasks that are so specialized that very few people know how to do these tasks well enough to evaluate the difference between good and exceptional. What's possible is not always well understood because most of us are awesome, but most of us are not wizards. We are great professional soccer players, but most of us are not, or footballers, but most of us are not Lionel Messi. What's possible is not even understood by the coaches, by the project managers, by the senior leaders, because, and here's the tricky part, wizards hide because they have no incentive to reveal themselves. And we regular people, we don't know what wizards can do. And we might not want to know because it might set the bar too high for ourselves. Harsh. But let me tell you something. If I decided, let's say I was younger and was back in school, whatever, and I decided I was going to be, coding, some kind of high level I wanted to be a quantum physicist. No matter how hard I try, and I know this about myself, like I'm totally fine. I don't have imposter syndrome too bad, or I have good self-esteem, adequate self-esteem. But no matter how hard I try, I wouldn't be able to do some of the things that these top quantum physicists, or even basically basic quantum physicists, do any more than I could be 7 feet tall. It's just not in the cards for me. Well, Becky, no, don't say that about yourself. There are things that people can do. There are Lionel Messis that no matter how hard these other professional soccer players try, they're not going to be Lionel Messis. And it's same primarily, and this is a phenomenon mostly found in tech, like I said, among knowledge workers, and most commonly among software developers. All right. And now I'm going to make the case quickly as I can. We're going to run out of time. Enter unemployment. Aha. I love this. What incentive the wizards to not reveal themselves? I've got to answer that right now. What does did I say over? I said enter overemployment. What does overemployment mean to you? Well, it means depriving the employee of the desired time. In one definition, individuals are defined as overemployed when they're prepared to sacrifice income for a given reduction in their work hours, but they can't do it at their current job. So like I only want to work 20 hours a week. So, the overemployed person would maybe be working 40 hours per week because they're forced to work 40 hours per week. That's the kind of, if you look up overemployment, that's the definition. But this other definition, this newer definition, I think is more interesting. And this other definition came into my awareness from a subreddit group called Overemployed, the secret door to financial freedom. Aha. All right. Overemployed has grown from this subreddit group to tens of thousands of people into a growing community of professionals looking to work at 2 or more jobs, earn extra income, and achieve financial freedom, free from office politics and layoffs. Free from office politics and layoffs. Overemployed describes itself as a counterculture movement, an American dream, except now globally available and accessible. So before we describe the difference between, the old school of, coming home from work and going to another job, having 3 or 4 jobs just to make ends meet. This is something different. All right. When you hear J1, J2, J3, someone says, that was my J1. That was my J3. That was my J15. I actually heard that saying, these wizards. What do you think about? Well, in the world of overemployment, J1 is your first job and J2 is your second job and so forth. This new group of overemployed folks look at remote work differently. different people, let me just say, different people like and dislike the flexibility of remote work for all different reasons. Some people hate it, some people like it. There's not like a one side, remote workers like this, other workers like that. We want to make it seem like everyone likes the same thing. We don't. We're motivated by different things. I mean, we're all motivated by, mastery, autonomy and purpose, but how we get there is different for everyone. So why is it hard to create this perfect scenario for every worker? But this subgroup of workers, and it heavily sways toward knowledge workers in general and software developers specifically, they don't want to use their extra work time in a workday chatting or scrolling or playing video games or posting or blogging or hiking. These folks want to use the extra time, their 9 to 5, that they have for J1 to devote to J2 and J3 and maybe even J4, all covering the same time secretly. They want to use the extra downtime that they have in their 9 to 5 jobs to make even more money. All right. So this is not old school going from job to job. This is working a bunch of jobs on the down low simultaneously. On August 13, 2021, the Wall Street Journal wrote an article about a group of workers that were hanging out in this online community, overemployed, and secretly working multiple full-time jobs. On February 2022, Bloomberg reported on the same thing, and Overemployed, the subreddit, and the whole movement took off. Overemployed, which you can do overemployed.com, you can look it up yourself, now offers membership to tens of thousands of people. It includes 24-hour support through their Discord, and it includes live salary insights and remote job opportunities. It's all kind of on the hush hush. And they have an overemployed guild sharing success stories and supporting hard-fought victories from those who are secretly holding down one or more J's, one or more jobs. Anyone want to take a guess at how these folks have time to work more than one full-time job where most of us feel overwhelmed with just one full-time job? Anyone want to take a guess? Well, they like to work, and often their work is coding. And they like to code more than they like to write blog posts or scroll or paint or play video games. And here's another thing. To be overemployed in this way means you have to be kind of super good at your work. And there's a different motivation for some of these folks to get really, really good at their jobs, like better and faster than average. Sometimes they're wizards. So I'm going to read you a confessional that will give you an idea of this movement. All right. So we've got, Johan says, best words today, wizards do not reveal themselves. You'll see why in just a minute. Abdurrachid, before the digital world, the process was a series of part-time jobs that you now hold more jobs. Absolutely. High performers, 100%. I'm going to read you. This is from a secret member of Overemployed. Quote, I soon realized that the project was overstaffed and most people were pretending to work. And I also realized that was the job I was hired to do. My job was to pretend. If this had been the only time this ever happened to me, I would consider it an anomaly. Unfortunately, this has been the case for almost every tech job I've had for years, attending irrelevant meetings, performing small tasks to pretend that a broken product worked well, and even to generate fake results. One of my recent tasks was to analyze what a couple of software code templates provided by Microsoft could be used for. Anyone familiar with the software development would be able to do this in a couple of hours at most. However, in our planning session, it was collectively considered that this task required many days of work and 2 people. The difficulty of tasks is chosen by vote in company X, in this company, one of his companies, one of his J2, I think it was. And in this case, the collective wisdom decided that the task was relatively hard. Now, I voted that it was easy, which didn't match the majority vote. When they inquired about this, I conceded that maybe it was more difficult than I thought after all. It's hard to disagree in these situations because it seems like you're going against the collective wisdom of the team. Also, when you notice that every single task is bloated this way and no one says anything, you don't want to challenge the system. End quote. All right. When you look critically at your own full-time job or part-time job, in person or remote, how much time is spent with meta work? Meetings about the meetings. Someone else mentioned that. Meetings about the meetings, and meetings about the meetings about the meetings, and meetings about the work, and meetings versus doing the work. No time at all? So actually just put it in the chat. No time at all at least 1 hour a day or more than 1 hour each day? How much time is spent on this meta work? Some people say way more than 1 hour each day. Some people say most of the days. So how much time do you spend scrolling or posting or texting about things that aren't necessarily about work? But you say, well, but they're kind of about work because I need to be aware of what's going on. How much of that time is really necessary for your work? So Abdurrajah says, thanks to the digital world, online coaching, social media marketing, trading online, web development after their part or full-time one job. Exactly. So basically these people, they might not want to do social media marketing or online training. They might want to code for 3 different people. I mean, some of these people have 3 different Zoom meetings going at the same time. So now we're running out of time, which I kind of thought we might, but I do want to I'm going to skip down to say that this is a phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that is hidden in sprints and in tasks. And the wizards, I'm pointing to myself like I'm a wizard. I am not a wizard, not a wizard. The wizards have no incentive for revealing themselves. So what do companies do? Maybe they're okay with just turning a blind eye to these wizards who are working multiple jobs. But that becomes a problem when there's coding that becomes intellectual property, or you have a contract that says anything you do within your terms of employment it's owned by this company, but you have 3 or 4 different companies that you're coding for. What happens when you get inspired by one company and accidentally share a little bit of string of code into another? How does this work? How do companies create incentives where the wizards are given an incentive to not do this or to do this? How do you think about this new planning fallacy where we may be overestimating how long projects will take because we want to make things more predictable? And in our predictions, we're just we're sacrificing productivity. And how do we think about this as we hand off projects from our fleshy intelligence to what we rudely call artificial intelligence? Like, once artificial intelligence is able to code, and we know I can only code, I'm just a regular professional footballer. I'm not Lionel Messi. And Lionel Messi isn't, robotic AI Lionel Messi. How do we plan for this? How do we think about this new planning fallacy when so much of the work is so beyond our understanding? I mean, totally different if you're planning like a plumbing project. You could look at all the ins and outs and you could kind of figure out how long something should take. But when you're dealing with things that are deep inside someone's brain, and that brain works a little different than yours, and you're the one in charge, how do you think about this? How do you create the right incentive structure to find out not only what different people want, but how different outstanding people are differently capable, including finding out who are the wizards and what do they want that might be the same as the rest of us, and what do they want that might be very different? So I didn't leave you with 3 bullet points of what we do, but I think this new planning fallacy is something to be aware of and something to think about. Whether you are a project manager, you're a wizard, you're on a team where you're wondering, is it realistic that this takes everyone 2 weeks? When some of these people were talking about completing a coding project in 18 minutes, that we're taking other software developers 3 weeks or 3 months in some cases. Well, maybe those software developers weren't taking 3 months either. Maybe it's a secret that everyone's keeping and no one wants to share, because if you've got 3 weeks for something that only is going to take you 18 minutes, you can add a J2 and a J3 and a J4. How do we think about these incentives, particularly in an era where we want to make sure that people have time for their downtime and their mental health and other projects? Anyway, stuff to think about. Let me know what you think in the chat. Thank you for being here. This was a little weird, a little different one, but this isn't something that's been written a lot about. So maybe the good thinkers here will be the ones to kind of create the conversation. Feel free to share, and hopefully all of you have a fantastic week. And I think I'll see you next week. I might be on the lookout for a notification, because I may take off a week because I got some traveling to do this week, but we'll see. Tune in. Have a great week.